And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. We begin with the latest in U.S.-China trade. The U.S. Department of Commerce has announced a tariff exclusion process for Chinese goods. Starting October 31st, during the following 4 months, U.S. stakeholders can apply to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, or USTR, to cancel the additional 10% tariffs placed on their Chinese imports. In their applications, American importers need to declare if the Chinese product can be substituted or if the product is of strategic significance to Chinese industrial policies. If the application is approved, tariffs already imposed since September the 1st, 2019 can be refunded retroactively. Since the latest round of China-U.S. trade talks concluded in Washington, voices from both sides have been cautiously positive for now. U.S. President Donald Trump even said on Monday that a Phase 1 trade pact is on track for November. So what can we expect from the so-called Phase 1 deal? I saw the insight from people in the know. The former U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Carlos Gutierrez, under the Bush administration from 2005 to 2009. During his tenure, he advocated agreements that promoted free trade and boosted global investment. Here's our conversation. Let's hear his answers. After the so-called Phase 1, Mr. Secretary, what can we expect?
I think Phase 1 is an opportunity, and I hope it's an opportunity that we seize, because it still has to be defined. There are certain agreements that have to take place regarding tariffs that would go into effect December 15. I think the U.S. side may want to see more market access, but the important thing is that we have halted the escalation. And if we restart the tariff war, then it will come back even stronger. So we should take advantage of this opportunity to stop and then start de-escalating.
I don't want to sound pessimistic, Mr. Secretary, but if you look at all the moving factors, including politics, impeachment, election, many would say they have to ponder before they see much hope even for December.
Well, it could be that elections and everything that's going on would encourage the president to make a deal. But then there are those who feel that the fact that the elections are going on and the impeachment hearings, and that may encourage the president to take a hard line. So that is part of the problem, is the uncertainty. And the quicker people see a certain future, the better off the markets will be, the economies, because investors are holding back.
Indeed.
Because of the uncertainty.
Mr. Secretary, you served a long time in the business community. Also, you've been serving the previous administration. If I could borrow your knowledge of history, is there some time that we can compare to what is going on right now and earlier? Is there something that we can use as, an example or a wisdom to learn from?
I like to go back to U.S. history in the 1920s. What we call the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Smoot-Hawley was a bill that was passed in the Congress, and they raised tariffs 25%, thinking that that would create jobs in the U.S. because products would be bought that are made in the U.S. But the rest of the world increased tariffs. And that was one of the factors that actually led to the Great Depression. We should learn from that. Everyone should know the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Everyone should study that. That's what I look at, and that's why I'm concerned, because of that historic experience.
Mr. Secretary, the business community was pinning some hope at the very beginning of the trade consultations. They thought they could see the end of the trade war, and as a result of that, there will be better environments for both sides. But obviously now the business community is being caught in between. So what is going to be the nature of interaction business community to have with politicians from both sides? After all, it's a war fight in their names.
Yes, that's a very good question. And the business community has nothing to do with this war, but they are the ones who are...
Collateral damage.
Exactly. Collateral damage. They're stuck in the middle. And I would say what they should do is let people know that they're stuck in the middle. These aren't decisions that they are making. And to the extent that they can convince the government in the U.S. that this is hurting business, it's hurting jobs, it will hurt the stock market, and also convince government officials here that they are stuck, that it's not their policy, but regrettably, as you say, they are collateral damage. They're the ones who are suffering.
But many of the businesses, if I understand, also from the United States, finding it difficult to speak out at a time when the political climate is quite interesting, particularly national security takes the lead in terms of the factors when making decisions. What do you say, Mr. Secretary?
You know, what we tell our clients is that companies need their own foreign policy.
Interesting.
Because our foreign policy today is very different, and it's not providing protection for U.S. companies, so companies have to have a more sophisticated view of the world. They have to understand geopolitics a lot better than today, and I think that's something we'll see in the future, CEOs taking a role in companies' foreign policy and not leaving it to governments anymore.
Can they defy the so-called trend or the rise of nationalism, unilateralism? Can they really defy that?
That's the trend in the world, that there are probably 10, 12 leaders who have promised to do things that no one has ever done. And institutions are obstacles to those leaders. So you see what's happening to the WTO. You see what's happening to other institutions. That is a reflection of this strongman mentality that they are going to do what no one has ever done. But these institutions are getting in the way, and those institutions will have to be rebuilt.
Mr. Secretary, you participate in a strategic economic dialogue between China and the United States. It is a mechanism. Now, do you think out of the trade negotiation, there is any hope that some kinds of mechanism can be established even with this administration?
Well, I think it would have to be, because if there is an agreement, assuming that we have a final agreement, then how is it
going to be implemented?
How is it implemented? What institutions? What rules? So yes, I think it's necessary, and I think it's part of implementation is that the two sides talk, and the two sides agree that the implementation is going as was agreed to in the agreement. So no question about it. We can't just sign something, or we can't just assume that we will never talk to each other. That would be a very big mistake. So yes, either now or sometime in the future, but we will restore those dialogues.
How to talk to each other? I mean, your job now is mainly to create a bridge, to
Yes.
let both sides talk to one another so that they know what each other are thinking at least. But what do you think is the key now to let them really talk to one another? I mean, it's a real talk and not just the saying things. Sorry, I want to come back to the 101 of communication, but that seems to be what's needed right now.
I think what's happening is that the talks are very public because of social media. Everyone is opining on what's happening with the trade talks, and that's dangerous because people simplify too much. They read one sentence on social media and say, oh, the trade war's over. The stock market goes up. But they're not paying attention to the detail.
Yeah.
And they're not realizing that the progress that they thought was there 6 months ago really wasn't there. But it's incredible what's happening. An announcement is made that President Xi and President Trump had a telephone call. The stock market goes up. So that is very dangerous, and it's very volatile, and it just shows how fragile things are.
But unfortunately, Mr. Secretary, what you're asking is not going to be realistic. because people are going to rely on social media for mainly their information, especially the public. You know, that is the logic of today's world. So how can you defy what some believe as the logic? In other words, is there still hope? Once again, I want to ask that question, but from a different angle.
I think it's a very good question. People are learning. People are learning about social media, and a lot of people have been burnt by social media. And I think this is going to be part of the learning process in this new digital age, is understanding that everything you read is not necessarily the complete picture.
But is our generation going to be the sacrifice? Is the U.S.-China relations going to be the sacrifice for this learning curve? That's probably very important.
Well, the numbers will come to us first, and I think that's the part that will convince both sides that we are on the wrong track. The global economy, the IMF has just lowered the growth to 3.2%, and that's very delicate. 3.2% for the world is very low. We're starting to see a little bit in the U.S. We're starting to see a little bit in China. This will eventually be what brings the leaders to an agreement, is the damage.
Mr. Secretary, you've been in office, so you know at times the logic is not really the logic of politics. For example, the American companies are earning more in China than the U.S. exports to China. That's just very simple fact. Whoever really got to know the meaning of it will know what's the point of fighting a trade war. But that simple logic is so hard to get across.
There's a lot of confusion.
A lot of confusion.
You know, if a U.S. company comes to China, some people interpret that as they're taking jobs from the U.S. to China, even though they're coming to China to serve the Chinese market. So I would say what reigns today in the U.S. is confusion. What is really happening? What is the truth? Is trade bad? Is it good? Are immigrants good? And the people who know the answer are the people on the ground who are getting impacted, who have to lay off workers because they raise prices because of the tariffs, so therefore they're selling less. Those are the people who understand what's going on.
Mr. Secretary, you were also instrumental in creating better trade relations between the United States and Mexico. Now we see NAFTA going to what they call the 2.0 version, whether you like it or not. It's just a title some would like to give. But what is the real nature now, do you think, the U.S. doing business with the others?
Well, that's the danger that the U.S. tried to split from the world order. That's very dangerous for everyone, because if the U.S. does it, it gives everyone a license to do it. This is an order, a set of rules, a set of institutions that have helped the world maintain peace since World War II. And they are being weakened, these institutions, but no one is talking about what is going to replace them. What is the new system? So imagine a collapse of these institutions with nothing to replace them. We would go back, you know, decades and decades.
It's hard to see always progress, but 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back and 1.5 steps back. Is this that moment for us?
You know, things are happening that don't have to happen. I think that is the unfortunate part. Sometimes things happen that should happen. Sometimes problems occur that are part of nature. But this is caused by individuals. And we don't have to be in this position. And the longer it takes to get an agreement, the more we will feel the pain. And we don't have to feel that pain. We don't have to be in pain. And I think we're going to realize that both sides in the near future.
Hopefully not too late.
I hope the sooner the better, because as soon as we realize that we are on the wrong track, then that will allow us to correct.
You said in a recent speech that if the cure to the disease is not the right cure, is even more dangerous than the disease itself. It's a wonderful quote. Mr. Secretary, would you like to help us understand better about that? What is the cure? What is the disease? And what is wrong with the current so-called cure?
It depends who defines it.
That's right. Let Secretary Guterres define it now.
The disease was meant, at least defined as trade deficit. But now that has moved into structural reform. How are we going to manage technology? How are we going to work together on technology in the future? We're just beginning the digital era. This is going to be a big, big revolution. That's the issue. And tariffs and trade deficits are almost a sideline. We should be talking about, do we need a WTO for technology? How does China and the U.S., how do we collaborate? Because if we don't, then we deny the world the benefits of scale and the benefits of these wonderful technologies. We should be working together to establish rules. That is a way that China and the U.S. can really lead.
But it's easy, you know. You just blame the others. It's so easy. You don't have to find a cure.
Well, until the patient starts really feeling pain, and until the patient starts going into intensive care, then we start looking for different cures.
This is, if I understand right, already your 5th trip to China this year alone. How to avoid as big as a Thucydides trap, as small as, you know, the image about one another, black and white, as immature as it is, it sounds like. But that's the reality, Mr. Secretary.
I worry about that very much because, you know, tourism is down in the U.S. When I was in government, we welcomed the first group of Chinese tourists.
We remember that moment.
You remember that. Today, tourism is down. It's hard to get a visa, so people aren't applying. So it's not just trade. It's the societies are not as close as they once were. They're not as close as they could be. Friendships aren't being made, which means that understanding isn't increasing. And we can talk all the technicalities we want, but until we understand each other, our past, our history, our culture, we will never be able to coexist in real harmony.
What do you think now is the most important qualities that all of us should have? Because you advocate everybody has a role to play here. What is that role? What is the important quality?
I would say that we need to, all of us, believe in something bigger than ourselves. And that something bigger is peace. That something bigger is harmony. That something bigger is not hurting jobs. We need to believe in a world that is in harmony and not in chaos. As the Chinese saying goes, we should seek harmony, not uniformity. We have different cultures, different histories, but we can't just be selfish and think about ourselves, especially China and the U.S., the two most important countries in the world. I believe we have the responsibility of thinking about something bigger than ourselves.
Mr. Secretary, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you really so much.
Thank you. Pleasure.